Hi, folks, and welcome to First Bite, Fed, Fun, and Functional, a speech therapy podcast sponsored by SpeechTherapyPD.com. I am your host on this nerd venture, Michelle Dawson, MS, CCC-SLP, CLC, the All Things Peds SLP. I am a colleague in the trenches of home health early intervention right there with you. I run my own private practice, Heartwood Speech Therapy, here in Culvertown, South Carolina, and I guest lecture nationwide on best practices for early intervention for the medically complex and fragile child. First Bite's mission is short and sweet, to bring light, hope, knowledge, and joy to the pediatric clinician, parent, or advocate.
By way of a nerdy conversation, so there's plenty of laughter too.
In this podcast, we cover everything from AAC to breastfeeding,
ethics on how to run a private practice,
pediatric dysphagia to clinical supervision,
and all other topics in the world of pediatric speech pathology. Our goal is to bring evidence-based practice straight to you by interviewing subject matter experts,
to break down the communication barriers so that we can access the knowledge of their fields.
Or, as a close friend says, to build the bridge.
By bringing other professionals and experts in our field together, we hope to spark advocacy, joy, and passion for continuing to grow and advance care for our little ones.
Every fourth episode, I join in. I'm Erin Forward, MSP, CCC-SLP, the Yankee by way of Rochester, New York transplant who actually inspired this journey. I bring a different perspective, that of a newish clinician with experience in early intervention, pediatric acute care, and nonprofit pediatric outpatient settings.
So sit back, relax, and watch out for all our squirrels and enjoy this geeky gig brought to you by SpeechTherapyPD.com. Hey, this is Michelle Dawson, and I need to update my disclosure statements. So my non-financial disclosures. I actively volunteer with Feeding Matters, National Foundation of Swallowing Disorders, NFOSD, Dysphagia Outreach Project, DOP. I am a former treasurer with the Council of State Association Presidents, CSAP, a past president of the South Carolina Speech, Language, and Hearing Association, SCISHA, a current Board of Trustees member with the Communication Disorders Foundation of Virginia, and I am a current member of ASHA SIG 13, SCISHA, the Speech Language Hearing Association of Virginia, SHAV, a member of the National Black Speech Language Hearing Association in Basel, and Dysphagia Research Society, DRS. My financial disclosures include receiving compensation for First Bite podcast from SpeechTherapyPD.com, as well as from additional webinars and for webinars associated with Understanding Dysphagia, which is also a podcast with SpeechTherapyPD.com. And I currently receive a salary from the University of South Carolina in my work as adjunct professor and student services coordinator. And I receive royalties from the sale of my book, Chasing the Swallow: Truth, Science, and Hope for Pediatric Feeding and Swallowing Disorders, as well as compensation for the CEUs associated with it from SpeechTherapyPD.com. So those are my current disclosure statements. Thanks, guys.
Hi, this is Erin Forward, and these are my disclosure statements. I receive a salary from Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center. I receive royalties from Speech Therapy PD for my work with First Bite Podcast and other presentations. I also receive payment for sales from the First Bite Boutique, which I have with Michelle Dawson. For non-financial disclosures, I am a member of ASHA and a member of Special Interest Group 13. I also am a volunteer for Feeding Matters. I am a contributor for the book Chasing the Swallow with Michelle Dawson, which I receive no financial gain. I also am a member of the South Carolina Coalition Committee with ICDL-DIF full-time.
The views and opinions expressed in today's podcast do not reflect the organizations associated with the speakers and are their views and opinions solely.
All right, everybody, we have one hell of an amazing woman with us today, and I am so incredibly grateful that our paths crossed. What was that, 2 years ago? I think we met the first time. Yeah.
Lifetime, couple months, 2 years.
Yes, it feels like yesterday, but yes. Y'all, I have none other than Dr. Lisa Bowers. She's an associate professor with the ComD department and the director of Service Learning Initiative at the University of Arkansas. Lisa and I met when we were both asked to do a presentation for CAPCSD, the Council of Academic Program in Communication Sciences and Disorders. We were asked by CAPCSD to do a joint talk on IPE and IPP. So she was representing the IPE component because it was school-based literacy, and I was coming in with the IPP department for PFD, right? For like connecting with like medical professionals. And it was such an eye-opening experience for myself because I never really grappled with the depth of interprofessional education that it required to work in the public schools with respect to literacy. Now, Lisa since then has gone on. She's actually the chair of that committee and is shaking things up in the literacy world. And it is, I am tickled pink that you said yes and you came on. So yay. Hi, I'm glad God brought us together.
Hey, oh my gosh, what a way to start a Monday morning. You just kind of lift me up, and well, I just appreciate that. And that is, it really was such great synergy when we met with CAPCSD and talking about two areas that I think the real connection there is with literacy and PFD. There are these areas that have come in the last, well, our career time, let's say 20-ish years, where depending on when you came in with your formal graduate education, you may or may not, and continue to may or may not get a lot of explicit instruction, even though we're meeting all the competencies in graduate school. Yeah, pediatric feeding disorders and literacy are these two things that hold a lot of space in our field, but are, when you meet individual clinicians, there's a lot of variability there on how much instruction or supervision in graduate school, or then even in their professional world, how much experience they have. So it was just, that was such a neat interaction. I'm so glad it happened, and it's just been amazing ever since to get to connect with you.
I got to be honest. You and I have talked previously before we hit the record button. I got zero experience with literacy when I was in graduate school. And I remember when I started out a lifetime ago as a speech teacher in the public schools, I shared a room because, you know, they like to lump all the SPED people together. So it was one classroom with a special education teacher, myself as a speech teacher, because that's what my certificate said, and a reading instructional specialist. We called her Little Bit. That was her nickname because she was about as big round as my kneecap. And another time there was a second reading specialist, all of us crammed into one half-size classroom. And had that not occurred, I wouldn't have known the overlap in what we do together and how we can support each other. But I still didn't know how to do it effectively. And then my world changed and I graduated with my master's degree and I went down the dysphagia pipeline. But I didn't see it again until University of South Carolina. And I think it's Dr. Christy Warfel. She's moved on now, but Warfel was there.
She's at Boys Town.
Yes. And God, she's brilliant. But Warfel was there and she was teaching all of these literacy classes. And I was external clinical supervisor and I was getting all these students. And I was like, why are they making you take so many? Because they make them take so many classes. And they were like, and my students were like, well, there's an overlap. But you made it make sense in her talk, because prior to that I was like, but is this our thing? So how is this our thing? Can you make it very simple for those of us that don't know this thing?
Yes. Well, first, I love your description of being in this room with the literacy instructionalist and special educator, and you, the speech person, right? And so
that's a nice way to say it.
The proximity to those professionals and being in the space where you're sharing space and kind of can hear what they're doing and listen in. For me, actually, my modular, which was the very nice word for our trailer at the top of the hill. I had half, and the gifted and talented teacher had the other half. And then sometimes the reading specialist would use her half when the GT teacher wasn't there. But still, that proximity, I think, is helpful. And so with interprofessional education, what I love about it and having some language around it is that it's learning with and from. And so we know in graduate school, and even in the undergraduate realm, if you know you're going to be communication sciences and disorders, once you choose that major, you're learning a lot about language development, speech development, anatomy and physiology, but all your coursework are with pre-service speech language pathology hopefuls. Even though psychology is also teaching a language development course, and human development is teaching a language development course, and special education, and all these other disciplines. And so I've always found that to be a huge disconnect, that we talk about when you're a speech language pathologist in the school, you're going to work with all these people and you're going to be in an IEP meeting. And so in this class, we're going to simulate that. And okay, you 5 pre-service SLP students, you be the gen ed teacher, and you be the sped teacher, and you be the speech path, and you be the counselor, and now we're going to pretend. And I just thought, why don't we have those actual people here?
Yes.
Those humans are they are on the college campus. Why are they not actually here? Why are we pretending to be them when we could just have them here? And so I think that with and from, that proximity as a student is so valuable. Because yes, it takes time. Yes, we're siloed. Yes, the University of Arkansas and University of Other has some barriers to that happening with classes and all the things. But if we have barriers that we're not willing to expand, how are we telling our students once they get to the schools, then you make the effort, then you make the time, then you do all of that in your professional realm, when that's not happening as they're being taught? So I think there's two things there, right? And I think there's the interprofessional education. I think the earlier we're teaching and learning with and from one another, the easier it is to transfer and transition to your professional realm so you can have interprofessional practice. And also, I think that with literacy, I think there is this weird thing, and I think PFD has it as well a little bit, not as much, but this, whose role is this? So thinking about roles and responsibilities. And so because you do have a literacy instructionist or literacy interventionist or literacy specialist, they have all these different terms, we think, well, that's their role. I'm the language and they're the literacy. And sometimes in school cultures have their own culture that you want to be part of the team. And maybe sometimes feeling part of the team is to stay in your lane. That actually can be in a school culture. Being a team player is, okay, I'll do the oral language and you do the literacy piece. And as we know, language is just not in buckets, right? It's not contained in this bucket. And so I think a lot of what we've learned with the last 25, 30 years about literacy is just how deeply tied it is to language. So we know that the foundation of language is going to facilitate when you start learning to read. And so we know we acquire speech and language, and then we're taught how to map what we know from speech and language with these symbols onto printed words. So it's just written language. But so it makes sense that our kiddos with articulation disorders or phonological processing who were having difficulty with acquiring speech and language are then that's why it's predictive of they're going to have a harder time with literacy. And so that's where our expertise in phonological development, our expertise on speech sound development, and our expertise on language. We know that language is predictive, both breadth and depth. So the number of words you know, but also how well you know those words, multiple meanings, multiple sentences, both of those are predictive of later literacy outcomes. So it's not just one piece of or one domain of language, right? It's all of them combined are going to make it more difficult or less difficult to be able to map what you know about speech and language to now phonics, mapping those sounds onto these orthographic letters or combinations that we're now seeing in print. And so I think it just, once SLPs know that. They recognize you don't have to add a whole lot to what you already know. You already know it. It's just thinking about it from that connected way that sometimes we don't learn.
Okay, wearing mom hat. Okay, mom, because we're moms first. So like we can't
Mom hat
not.
is a thing.
Yes, it was interesting to me to watch the trajectory of my children with respect to reading and spelling, right? So Goose Danger, my oldest, who's 11, he was in first grade when the pandemic hit, right? So he learned whole words, and also he's neurodivergent. So like there's that factor as well. But he learned whole words. So he was just sight word reading, right? We did so much speech therapy with Dr. Angela McLeod for letter sound correspondence to help with spelling. Angela, if you're listening, I'd like to say I did a really, really thorough job with the carryover strategies, but you and I both know that would not be the truth. But we did a fair to middle and carryover with the strategies. And you know what? He's actually spelling pretty good now in sixth grade.
Yes.
It did take us till then, but
Yes.
we got there. But Bear, who also had Angela, but he was born with a hearing, well, he passed his newborn hearing test and then had a ton of hearing loss, otitis media, a bunch of stuff. His letter sound correspondence was profound because he had explicit instruction for speech sound disorder.
Mm-hmm.
So his ability to spell was exceptional. And I think it's because Angela broke it down.
Absolutely.
And he hit pandemic in 4K. So like it's kind of interesting to me to see how the trajectory of academic learning and their unique needs has played out now that we're in fourth and sixth grade. It's just, I see the role of the speech pathologist as a mom in all of this.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So y'all, I wholeheartedly agree with everything that she's saying. Now, as the speech therapist, I won't treat speech sound disorder. I will screw that up royally, but I know who to refer you to. So there's that.
And I think that is, what we were talking about earlier. I think that's just part of our field, is that we end up, because of our scope of practice, once you graduate, you end up specializing in different areas depending on what settings. And the beauty of it is, if you decide to change lanes and the hospital setting's no longer working for you, I know so many people who've done this and they go back to the schools, you can get the professional development, a lot of it in those different areas, to be able to make that switch. And sometimes the professional development is, what do I want to say? It's so necessary at that time for that professional going into a different setting. But yeah, it's hard. There's no way I wouldn't touch PFD right now. That would not even be ethical. But I know who to refer to.
Yes. Okay. So you said something at the beginning that kind of hit a little close to home to my heart. You said, what was the statistic on literacy classes now in the academic world?
Yeah. So about a third of graduate programs have a standalone literacy course. So even now, it's not, and again, that's because we have a big scope of practice. So while literacy is part of that scope of practice, that doesn't mean that all graduates are going to have a standalone literacy course in their graduate program.
Yes. And honestly, the PFD world is less than that, but we know that. But then we add in the variables of, and please do not think I'm shaming anyone in this statement, but we add in the variables that a lot of our academic faculty that are teaching don't come from the hands-on clinical experiences of having done this in the trenches.
Right.
And you and I both know the intensity of the day-to-day for a school-based clinician, the caseload caps that should be in place but are not in place. And there's all of these added barriers. But then if we take on another level, our students, when they go out into clinical practicums, they may not get a school-based practicum. They may not have a external clinical supervisor that actually had any formal training or actually does literacy per se. And by does literacy, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So
it's a struggle. I'll say this. I mean, I've been teaching this class now at the University of Arkansas. This is my 13th year, and I just had a meeting 2 weeks ago, which was so fun, with a student. Of course, no, she's not a student, but she was a student in my first class that I taught in 2012. And now her and her sister, who is a CALT, a certified academic language therapist. So it's a specific certificate training for working with dyslexia through the International Dyslexia Association and another organization that I'm blanking on the acronym.
That's okay. What was that word that, because I thought you said a cult, and as we're coming up on Halloween,
I know, it's my accent.
Woo!
I know. CALT. CALT, but it does sound a little like cult. CALT.
Okay.
It's my accent. Can you tell I'm from Delaware?
I got you. We're good.
I've not lived in Delaware a long time, but I did graduate from high school and lived there my entire, born and raised and graduated from Delaware in high school and from Delaware. But
Awesome.
CALT, Certified Academic Language Therapist. But they're sisters, and so the one has a lot of training in dyslexia, and the other is a speech language pathologist, and they have a clinic where they diagnose and provide treatment to students who have dyslexia.
Amazing.
And so it was so fascinating to talk with her and, think about my time here at the U of A and how much I've learned. But when I started as a speech therapist in the schools, and I just knew. The reason I went back and got my PhD was because I knew something was missing. I knew that I had expertise that was not being leveraged, and I did not know how to integrate me as a professional or that knowledge into the school setting. I just knew I loved my job. I loved being in the schools, but what I was doing as an SLP was not as powerful or as impactful as I thought it could be. And that was the missing link, was literacy. And that's really why I went back and got my PhD, because I knew I loved the schools and I loved what I was doing, but how could I do that? And interprofessional education was really a piece of that. And it's so funny you talk about Crystal Werfel, because she got her undergraduate degree at the University of Tennessee, and her honors thesis was with my PhD mentor. And so I see a lot. And we do a lot with spelling. We both have published in spelling. And then my undergraduate master's student, my first one, was a doc student under Dr. Werfel, and she has now graduated. And so it's just real fun to see that connection and in our field, just see the impact that we are having. It feels, I thought it would have been more, but you feel the momentum, and some of that is just one student at a time, seeing these students who are really just the next level awesome, and taking that ability to integrate. And so so a lot of what I teach in my literacy class is about literacy. It is about systematic, explicit instruction, what that looks like, talking about multisensory teaching with language skills, but also with interprofessional education, how to work with teachers, how to start those conversations, where you can bring your expertise, but also where you really need to bring your humility. I mean, I don't know about my students, but I wanted to be a speech path because 25 little humans terrified me in a classroom. And so to be able to manage that many little people all day, every day, I just think that's some amazing stuff.
My mother-in-law is a retired 5th grade and SPED teacher. And her teacher's voice makes everybody in the family jump too. And my husband and his father were both West Point grads. And let me tell you what, if I had to get somebody to call a classroom together or a group of people together, I would call Grace Lynn any day of the week, because they just can. Yeah.
And with interprofessional education, again, part of it is you cannot bring in a guest lecturer. That's great. And I do that. I bring in our elementary education teacher. It's wonderful, but that's not it. It is, you need the students who are going to be the professionals, they need to be in the room together learning, and they need to see the other professionals modeling. This is what it looks like. And so I'm very excited. At our college, we have an interprofessional education cooperative that is amazing because our college is so unique. We're the College of Education and Health Professions. And so we have a lot of these different professions together that at times aren't in the same structure, and that's a barrier in and of itself. And so we're teaching a seminar this semester. We start in 2 weeks. I'm so excited. We're partnering with a local school district, and we have students in this seminar who are going to go to the response to intervention meeting that they have at the school with all of the professionals. And we have all of our students, and we have occupational therapy, we have elementary education, we have, of course, speech path, a counselor, and pre-nursing. And so we have these students who are going to get this instruction with the IPEC competencies. So again, things that we all talk about, values and ethics, working with team members, and just having shared values, ethical conduct. We do that, but just having that framework first, right? Versus just implicit. And we're doing that in our own field now with our professional development. You have to have an hour. So recognizing that you need that explicit professional development, not just implicitly, oh yeah, of course I'm ethical, right?
Yes.
You need to talk about what that actually means within different fields,
Yes.
roles and responsibilities. So knowing your role, knowing others' role, so that you don't have to think I have to stay in my lane. You can say, I know what my lane is, but there's some shared space here, and let's find it. Communication. Of course, we're the communication experts. That's kind of what I want our name to be, or something. How do we should brainstorm that offline. How do we have communication and the feeding and swallowing piece, right?
Yes, because SLP is, I always see the debate online, and I'm like, no, I'm okay if they call me the speech therapist, or if they call me ST, because they call it OTPT. I understand that pathologist means that I diagnose, which I get, but also embracing the neurodivergence movement, I do fret that by giving a diagnosis, I am implying that one brain is inferior when it just learns differently. And
Yes.
so there's that.
It's difficult.
Yes, it is.
But thinking about communication, how do we communicate with others?
Yes. I served on the IPE-IDE Council at James Madison for a year. And it was very interesting because it was the IPE-IDE Council for the College of Health and Behavioral Studies. And so they had, and actually Dr. Erin Kleinert, who's coordinator for the online program, this woman is freaking brilliant, and she's like sunshine. But Erin served in like setting up some of the modules and some of the activities. And every spring semester, the graduate students that for the SLP department in their first year would have to get together with the Department of Nursing, Department of PA, the Rehab Science Athletic Trainers, which is kind of an interesting stretch, SLPs, OTs, and psych, right?
Yes.
And they'd work through this really impressive module of what is our role and responsibility. And the one that I got to observe that Erin led was actually, which I was late to. I distinctly remember spilling a giant cup of coffee on me. And so I'm the last faculty member there in a room full of 350 people. And then I came in soaking wet from a cup of coffee. But anywho, life, we move on. But it was a concussion. It was a football player that had a concussion, and the role of the SLP. And what was interesting was in that setting, nobody outside of the SLP world thought an SLP had anything to do with concussion rehab.
Oh gosh, that was my first real life experience as an SLP. I was in the schools first year going to my 6th grade. My itinerant, was only there 2 afternoons a week for my middle school. And I'm looking for my student, and where is he but in-school suspension? I was like, oh,
why?
Can't be doing that, because he had done something that they thought was inappropriate in the class setting, but he was a TBI. He had a TBI from a concussion. I'm like, oh gosh, he can't put him in ISS. And let me explain to you his behaviors. Yes, he does. So that was my first experience with education on, oh, yeah. So first of all, ISS is not appropriate. And also,
No.
let's talk about what behaviors you might see, why you might see them, and how we can accommodate him in the regular setting. And it wasn't necessarily their fault. It was just one day they changed from having a self-contained classroom to push-in model, and he was just in the classroom, and they just, without any paperwork or training, it just, was a bad situation. So that was my first experience of, okay, my role is not, these goals and objectives and meeting with him 30 minutes a week to work to improve this, that, the other. My role is educating everyone, getting the team together, communicating effectively what we can and cannot be doing, which cannot be doing in school suspension. And also, how can we use tools so that he can be successful in the classroom setting that he's now in?
Yes. Okay. So can I help ask a case study question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see.
I have a little girl on my caseload, and we'll make y'all, this is very HIPAA compliant, that I got pulled in for because we thought she needed an AAC eval. Baby girl is in kindergarten. She is a pistol. I mean, we are wide open and passionate for life, right? Sensory processing disorder, I don't have a lot of information on PMH. I could see ETOH or NAS being potential, different home situation, but thriving. And even though we were 5 at the time, like at the start of kindergarten, 3-word combos on average, but it almost presents as cluttering because there's like oppressive speech. So we do 3 words and then we come up for air, and then we do 3, and they're very disjointed. Letter sound correspondence isn't really
Not
there. So I pulled out lamp words for life on an AAC device and started modeling. So we got like some visual cues. But what I found was baby girl hadn't had early intervention. And so there was no explicit caregiver coaching. We went into the public schools, and there's school-based SLP can't easily communicate with primary caregivers. And so how do we do effective therapy? So me just saying, hey, let's target this one thing for the week. And it's working very well. So now we have functional 4 and 5-word phrases in 3-month time span, 2-month time span. Not the right pronouns, definitely not the right verb tenses, but I don't really know where to go because I'm seeing we don't need an AAC device like that. I can tell.
So number one,
So like I've started phasing out the AAC device, and then I'm using printed word. Like we're just simply targeting personal pronoun usage because we refer to ourselves as me or my instead of and he and her or him and his or backwards. Like our pronouns are all over the place. I view myself in the role of interprofessional practice. We've got signs and symptoms of Tourette's and or a seizure disorder, signs and symptoms of obstructive sleep apnea. So I'm trying to navigate medical management to get us where we need to get to. Already been to developmental or referrals and for developmental peds. So like I'm doing my end of it. So I feel like my job is to kind of just jumpstart and connect people. But how do I improve the quality and caliber of therapy that I'm doing?
Well, first, it sounds like you're doing an amazing job. She comes in for a referral for something, and you very quickly pivot to.
Oh, it's a big pivot.
This is not AAC. And I could understand maybe why they would think AAC because you do have all these other things. So you are looking at the medical history, and there's something going on, right? Brain and behavior here that we have not identified. But you're also recognizing she's not ready for literacy. We do not have, we cannot be bringing in these weird symbols and trying to give them meaning when we don't
That's our
have
name.
the
Yes.
language.
Yes.
We're not using correct pronouns. So we haven't, just from home or developmentally, we are not listening and being able to receive that, understand it, and then say it expressively in the correct way. So I think one would be, I don't know why there's this, if we don't stay, and I know it's, you want to stay on grade level, but truly, if we are not processing language, there is no way we can just bring in 26 letters that actually represent 44 sounds, that some don't actually represent their own sound, right? They represent two other different sounds, and sometimes two of them make one sound, and sometimes one of them make two sounds. So that, I think sometimes it becomes, it's salient for the instructor to have those letters to use, but really for her, I would be working on phonological awareness and awareness of of language without any additional. You might work on letters like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, kind of, do we know how to say the alphabet, and can we point to the letter as we say the letter name? But as far as speech sound to letter correspondence, I don't know if I would go there. I would really focus, as you're doing, you cannot get to literacy. You can't learn literacy if you have not acquired a foundation in language.
Yes. Okay, I feel better because I started out with a strategy I saw a little bit do that she taught me, the picture walking.
And I was about to say, you could use those AAC pictures, because pictures are a lot easier, and you could even have the word at the bottom so they recognize eventually these letters mean something. They mean something tied to this picture, which is tied to the word, which is tied to the sentence.
Yep.
But you're not going to be working on the word. That's just there for her to have as a literacy artifact. Like, oh, and eventually one day these things will make sense too.
Literacy artifact? That sounds fancy.
It's kind of, yeah. Melanie Shealy and Dr. Van Cleek have been talking about, have had this since the 80s, talking about that in our world, there's just literacy artifacts, right? We're reading recipes. So kids are exposed to literacy in many different ways. It's on our coffee mugs and on our, my son's first letter that he knew was T, even though his name is not starting with the T, but my husband and I both graduated from the University of Tennessee. So we have big T's on a lot of our t-shirts. And so
I love that.
there, and so he knew that letter. And that's why a lot of the letters we go to first are start of our name, because it's familiar and it's probably been around in our environment a long time, with more frequency.
Okay. Well,
than others. So yeah,
we've been
that's
working.
where I would start with her.
Thank you, because I've been working on correcting for the pronoun I, and lamp is set up like a sentence.
That's
so
right.
So like I knew that much, and I'm making the pitch. We've got to incorporate print involved, like let her see it.
That's right. She's got to see it. And those are pre-concepts, top to bottom, left to right, front to back. We turn the page. So all of those things are priming for eventual literacy independence, right? As we start reading. But where she is, she needs to,
yes. We started doing, have you ever read the book Tuesday or heard of it?
I don't know.
It's one of my favorite books of all time, and it's just a picture book, and it's about frogs flying on lily pads. And it's just these funny stories and she loves this book. Yes. And so I have her picture walk it and then simply touching each picture as she tells me something about it, because we were all over the place and orientation to the book was not there.
Right.
And so
again, how can you begin to read if you do not have these concepts about print?
Yes.
Your brain is trying to organize that whole event.
Yes. And for her, it was, I'll never forget her caregivers watching her first attempt at this, because, as a caregiver, we tend to read to them. Mm-hmm. asking them to participate doesn't always happen, right? And so one of the caregivers asked me, they were like, how do we help with this at home? And I was like, oh. And I'm like pulling Kelly Farquharson and Angie Neal out of the depths of my brains. And you, because I saw you talk on this, I'm like pulling this out and I'm like, let her do the narrative. Let her tell you the story, but correct. So this past week, we just did first, second, and third through the act of putting on our shoes. First, I put on my socks. Second, I put on my shoes. Third, I jump because but like those.
Well, and I love that you got the caregiver engaged and empowered and felt comfortable enough with you to say, how do I do this? I mean, I just love that, because I think that shows that you were making what you were doing accessible to the parent. And I think that, you know, in parent coaching, and I think a lot of our role is to facilitate and empower the parents who are going to need these skills for the rest, you know, for the rest of the week and all their time that they are spending together. So I love hearing that they felt comfortable and confident enough to ask you that question, because, you know, it's when parents aren't able to or don't feel comfortable asking questions that it feels overwhelming. Like, oh, I could never do that.
Yeah. And some of that is health literacy. And even if you work in the public schools, there's academic literacy embedded within the schools, knowing how to advocate for IEPs, knowing how to advocate for inclusion, knowing how to, that I know we're trained in how to do this in school, but at the same time, when rubber meets the road and it's your job, and a lot of school-based clinicians are not encouraged to empower their caregivers behind the scenes. You might get your hand slapped, which is unethical and inappropriate, but we all know that it happens. It's like I feel like I should be whispering this little secret when it's not a secret, but you know what I mean? But
yeah, because parent advocacy is one of our roles.
Yes.
And yet it's also a difficult scenario as the SLP who is also an employee of a district.
Yes. Okay. So how would you encourage an SLP listening now to advocate for interprofessional education or interdisciplinary education? That's the word I'm looking for. IDE as well. I said IPP earlier when we were talking, and I meant IDE versus IPE, and so the overlap. But how do you advocate for this?
So the two different things, right? So interprofessional practice is what we're hoping for in this, and talking about school-based SLPs in the school setting, right? That we are learning with and from and working with other professionals towards shared goals. And so I hope with my role at the academic piece, teaching graduate students, to provide those opportunities in the interprofessional education when they're students, or, you know, talking about in their clinical placements. So I feel really lucky that our students go into the schools their first semester, all of them, all of our first semester graduate students are in the school setting, sometimes private practice, but either school or working with school-age children in the private practice. And we have a scaffolding model. So they're required to be on site for 5 hours a week. And for the first 3 weeks, they're just observing. And then for the next 3 weeks, and then for the next 3 weeks, they're required to get, I think, maybe one direct client hour that they are facilitating the therapy session. And then they just kind of scaffold up and build throughout that semester. So it's really been helpful to me to have them in that school setting and observing, because they come to my class with questions and ready. Like, ooh, I'm going to the school tomorrow, so I need to know this information now. And then they come with their questions. I've got my student and this is what we're working on. And it's been such a great exchange versus before, when I taught the class years ago when they weren't in the schools. We made that switch basically around the pandemic. from the traditional model where they were in our clinic with one client. It could be a client of any across whatever, and now they're all in the schools, and so they take my course, and they also take speech sound disorders, and then they're also taking research methods. And so all of those combined, as they have that really, it's not homogenous because some are in the middle school, some are in the elementary schools, but they are all with school-based kids with these different needs, but they are able to see those interconnections. So, and I have them interview another professional within the school. So it's not IPE because they're not with the students, but we're working towards that. So we're looking for, where are the schools that we have our gen ed teachers and our special education teachers in their internships. Let's put our students in those schools as well. So they're with those SLPs, so they're all in the same school setting for their internships or their clinical practicums, so they can have some cross shared exchanges. We've done voice thread. So having the special education, the general education, and the speech path students having a case scenario, kind of what you're talking about, instead of a all together all day simulation. When they're in the same setting, they talk about the students on voice thread, or they talk about a certain case study, and they'll come on voice thread where they're all providing their role and responsibility, or how could
What
you
is
engage.
voice thread?
It's
Like an app or like a program?
it's a platform, let's say, but
Okay.
yeah, it's where you can have a PowerPoint and you can give a recorded lecture, let's say, but then the students can come in and you give a slide, and they can come in and put a video or a
Cool.
chat. And
Cool.
so it's almost like, have you ever used Marco Polo app? My friends and I do this, where it's Marco Polo. I say Marco, you say Polo. So I'll send my friends, this is how my high school friends and I keep in touch. I send a video, because we can't all get on the phone at the same time, but I'll send a video, and then they watch it whenever they can, and then they respond whenever they can. It's a video. And so VoiceThread's like the academic way that you can just have this on Blackboard, and the students can put their videos, and so then they can watch the videos of the other professionals. It works really well. I love doing it. So they're not in the same room, but it feels real time.
Yes, I love this. I'm sorry. What you don't know is that I'm internally giggling because you said Marco Polo, and we play that game at the house when we're trying to find my husband, and he is always on the can. Whenever we're like, Marco Polo, where's daddy? And we're like, oh, he's pooping. We knew it. So like, I'm just stuck in like
Marco
little
Polo.
boy mom fart
It's
jokes.
a great app. That is how my friends and I are on it all the time. Just little pop-up video. Here's what's happening in my life, and that's how we kind of stay connected. And so VoiceThread's a little bit like that, because you have the video. It doesn't have to be synchronous. It's all asynchronous. And then you can have the different students from the different courses, because that's the hardest part, is getting them in the classroom at the same time. But they can be learning from a module and then respond to that module, or learning from, we did an after school program, because I love staying in the schools too. So, and since my kids are elementary age, I just run after school programs at their school. So I get to bring my students and see my kids, and I love it.
I get my boys to model meal prep or making something, and I record them and share it with the patients, caregivers. So like, because they're, upper elementary, young middle, but I have a good little stockpile of videos. Okay, so then one thing that I kind of wonder with respect to the literacy piece, but this has been gnawing at me for the last couple years. And it goes back to the prevalence of coursework, right? Mm-hmm. So we can't build a class for every niche topic matter, right? And I know that. And I know that those, okay, so y'all building
and just to say, I don't know if we would want to, right?
No.
Because you've got to have the right, you don't want just to require every graduate program to have, let me pick AAC. We have one because we have Dr. Christine Holyfield, who's amazing at AAC. So we have an acquired AAC course because we have her. But I don't know if you want every program that's accredited to have a required course on everything, because you have to have the right people.
Yes. Yes, you do.
So,
And it takes forever to get a course approved and ratified
yes.
and added.
Yes.
Y'all, we're talking to get a class into a curriculum, it could take literally 2 to 3 years before that class is even taught from the conception, because it has to go in when like a new
Course
program change.
catalog.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So that being said, have you ever seen, because I haven't, a required pediatric medical speech pathology class?
We used to have one.
Okay.
So we had a school-based, and well, I don't know if it was pediatric. It was medical,
That's it.
but it's again across the lifespan.
Okay, so what I have seen is a medical speech pathology class. And a lot
Yes.
of programs will advertise that they have a medical speech pathology class. But when you look at it, it is all adults. But
Yeah.
here's the catch. These babies that we're working with, I'm not talking itty bitty babies, I'm talking even our elementary school kids. They, excuse me, folks, what y'all don't know is the basement flooded and I'm allergic to mold, and we have mold in the basement and they still haven't gutted the walls. So I'm still hacking a coffin. So excuse me. Eventually it will get out of here. But until then, thank goodness for the editors. But what I have found is that we don't have this coursework, and we have patients that are surviving with these complex etiologies that are now hitting the public schools, but we have not taught colleagues. We don't have the tools and resources to teach colleagues on how to work with the trajectory of certain diagnoses, like complex seizure disorders, complex like HIE, and those kind, like what are our roles, and are we marrying caregiver roles and IEP roles with medical prognosis, when for so long we have told school-based clinicians that they can't ask for medical records, that you can't do these things, which is to me unethical, because I think a school-based clinician should have access to medical records to create their annual IEPs, because that information will shape and dictate your goal and your plan of care development. But that's just
Absolutely. I don't know if I'd have to go back and think about that if I was told I couldn't have medical records. I mean, in the school setting, they say you can only work on
academically
skills for
relevant.
that are academically relevant if there is a barrier to academic success, right? So but in that, if they've qualified for services for an individual education plan and you don't have their case history and their medical history, then you're flying blind.
Yes, you are. Amen. Wow, my Southern Baptist just showed.
Yeah, so I don't think I ever had that. But what I have learned is, so I think I referenced this, or I don't know if we were talking about it offline earlier, but we have at the University of Arkansas a postmaster certificate. So it's 15 credit hours. So school-based SLPs, oftentimes
Virtual or on campus?
all asynchronous online. So it's through our global campus. Yes. So we have students from all over the country. I've had students from Oregon, Illinois. Shout out to my Pennsylvania, New Jersey people. There's a lot from those two states that come, that I think they hear about it and they tell their colleagues. So Ohio, Arkansas, but really from all over. And I use the same books as I use for my first year graduate students, and every time I'm the first course in the series of 5, because school-based SLPs, they usually get a salary bump, right? So you have your master's. If you have your master's plus 15, that's a bump. If you have a master's plus 30, that's a bump. So it depends. And I think the reason we get some pockets of states is that their professional development is paid for by their employer and by their district. So yeah, it's really been, I love the class. I love all of the seasoned professionals. So it's the same materials, but taught totally different because of their expertise and their level of knowledge in working in the schools. But I ask these questions about their state, and the variability in state practice is so, I mean, you know it, but then when you get them together talking about it, It's really fascinating. And that's really, I've seen such, I don't know, they come out of the certificate really advocates because they just have a lot of knowledge on what's going on. Because when you start, you're like, my caseload. And then you kind of like look up and you think, my school, my district, my state. And this is an opportunity to kind of have a more national lens on these different areas of practice within the schools. So I don't know where I started, why I bring that. Oh, I guess I bring that up because of what you're talking about with the medical history. There
Yes.
is some really strange things going on at different state levels. So there's one state that I won't call out, but one state in particular where the SLP is, I don't know how they do this, but not allowed is what I was told to give the CTOP, because that is within the scope of the reading specialist. So the reading specialist gives the CTOP, the SLP does not. And I thought,
How?
I mean, I don't know if not allowed just means like that's the culture or, but it's not supposed to be in their assessment battery to give the CTOP. How is phonological processing not the SLP? That was just bizarre to me. And so again, we're putting these very arbitrary lines that are strange. And medical records is just another example, I think, of that strange. Well, yes, we have to meet the academic needs, and there has to be a significant need in academics, but that doesn't mean that the information about their medical history isn't highly relevant and really necessary in order to make that plan for their IEP.
I had an eval a couple weeks ago, and the child was in foster care, so we had no baseline knowledge, right? Like that there's, and children that go through the systems, oftentimes their medical records are sealed up until they get to wherever they currently are. And I got called in a feeding case, and what I saw was akin to athetoid CP at 5. And we have no diagnosis other than a seizure disorder. And I'm watching these behaviors. And one, cognitively, we are not present in order to be able to be coached to stop certain behaviors, right? Like we're just not developmentally there. So personally, it's not appropriate for me to go in and to do therapy. I don't think my services are warranted. What we need is a safety plan for mealtime in the schools. Like he needs a 1-to-1. So that just for safety. So we don't like stuff and do those kind of behaviors. But I mean, we can't say, only take so much food on a bite because we're just not there, right? We won't remember. Yeah. And also, folks, you don't have to say yes to every single patient that comes across your caseload for things like this because it might not be clinically relevant or appropriate at this moment in time. So I had a really, really good heart-to-heart with the pediatrician who, Tiny Human's also new to her too. And I'm like, look, this is what I saw. Do you have any info on imaging on this? And also some pretty gnarly behaviors, right, in general that needed addressing.
Yeah.
And she was like, none. And I'm like, this is all going to change the plan of care, even with the schools. And it reminded me a lifetime ago when I was advocating during a meeting, and the chair of the meeting, who was totally on our side for why we needed the medical records, she gave this example of, we wrote this plan of care predicated on this. She's like, but then come to find out the child had agenesis of the corpus callosum. Medical records have a place, right?
Yes,
because that dictated a huge change.
Right.
And that's all I could think of when I'm watching this kid. And new to me, new to pediatrician, we're flying blind, but like, we need CT scans. We need neurophysiatry to come in and take a look at like motor movement planning. But also seizure management is so like, we're looking at all of these things and I'm like, what is this? How are we progressing in the public schools as well?
Right. And I think that's such a great again, going back to the advocacy of interprofessional
Professional.
practice,
Yes.
we cannot make informed academic decisions in the absence of accurate medical history.
Yeah.
There's not a divide there. Now, we are not going to treat medical diagnoses.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. That's a total separate thing. That is a roles and responsibilities. But we need to be in communication and have that information so our evaluation and our plan of care is appropriate. And it can't be appropriate if we're doing this over here medically and we're doing this over here academically. This is not a whole human.
Yes. Yes.
And so I just think that's why I just think it's so valuable in all of these areas. Another thing I'll say, going back to my courses, both with the graduate students and with the postmaster certificate. So one thing we always do is we define dyslexia, talk about dyslexia, because even for me, dyslexia has been a journey as an SLP. Is it within our scope of practice? Should we touch dyslexia? I mean, the term is really a whole thing unto itself. And I think that's one area that SLPs get tripped up on because it is neurobiological in origin, but it is a language. It's a language disorder, right?
I didn't know dyslexia was neurobiological in origin.
Yeah. So
What does that mean?
Yes. So when you look at when cognitive neuroscientists, again, not us, not our scope of practice, and they're so fascinating. I get to go to these conferences and they'll show their maps of the brain and tell you here's what the structure of a brain looks like for, I don't know who's typical, but the typical people.
Yes.
And here's the brain structure of an individual with dyslexia. And so you can see that there are some structural differences in their brain and how their brains process information. They just process information differently. And so it's so fascinating to me. And so I'm talking to these very, smart experts in their field. I'm like, that is so fascinating. I don't know how to do brain mapping. Excellent. What do we do? And they look at me like I'm an alien. What do you mean? What do I do? I just told you what I found. I just showed you this neurological difference in brain structure and function. I'm like, that's awesome. What do we do? And that is just they are not thinking oftentimes of what
Intervention.
we do with it. They just know it's there. And you need that. You need that person who's saying, this is a difference. And so I think people get wrapped up. I do think there is some value, and we, talking in our conversation about, knowing the medical diagnosis, even though we're not treating the medical diagnosis, is helpful. Having a diagnosis of dyslexia can be very helpful and powerful to some families and some individuals. For some, it's just not as important. Here's the characteristics of how I learn to read or where my difficulties are, and how do we accommodate this person so that they can have success with reading and writing. And so that's kind of what we talk about is, does your state have an adopted definition? Who can diagnose? Because that can be squirrely. Is it the school psychologist? Is it not diagnosed by the district? A lot of districts will circumvent, we don't diagnose, but we can identify characteristics of dyslexia. And so if there's weak phonological processing, vocabulary, all language-based difficulties with trying to process language and then map it to representations so that there's a disconnect there. So we talk about these things as far as who's diagnosing and who's treating. And I just think it's so valuable when we circle back to, okay, now you know what's going on within your state and your district. What do you do? Because to your point, having these academic discussions is important and valuable, and that can move us forward. But we also need to know, what do I do tomorrow with my little
the tiny human
person that is sitting in front of me? And so I think that's where I go back to interprofessional education and practice, valuing everyone's contribution, recognizing the ethics within our field, what we need to be fighting for, and not overstepping our boundary as a professional, but recognizing what our boundary is and being in effective communication and recognizing all of the professionals are so valuable and important. And my friend and I talk about this, who's an elementary education professor, and her and I are co-teaching the interdisciplinary class together. You know, the literature in dyslexia, which would be a written language disorder, right there in language, is that 1 in 5 individuals have characteristics of dyslexia. So weak phonological processing is one of the defining characteristics, but not the only one. And she says if it's 1 in 5, that is not a SPED problem. That's a gen ed problem. If we're talking 1 in 5.
Yes.
And I think that's so important to remember, that we cannot just say, if we are having these problems, then we need to take it over into this realm, particularly when we're talking about inclusion, when we're talking about least restrictive environment, getting children back more. And that's a whole different topic. What is least restrictive environment, right? But when thinking about it, to just put the gen ed teacher as I'm the gen ed teacher and everything else should be handled by everybody else is really problematic. And that's where SLPs can be supportive and working with, but also understanding and respecting and valuing the contribution that gen ed teacher is providing to the team for what they're seeing, because they're the ones that are seeing all of, year to year, all of these kids, what's working, what's not working. It's just so fun for me to have these, to think about the possibilities. And a lot of it can be opportunity, school culture, right?
Oh, that's such a variable.
Yes.
Yes.
So if you've been to one school, you've been to one school.
Yes.
I always kind of think of it that way, because each school just has its own kind of system and population that they're serving. Yeah.
Yes.
So even district to district, it can change. So we can't have, so maybe you're an SLP and you're listening, you're like, I don't, some of this kind of resonates, but not all of it. So the books that I use, one is Overcoming Dyslexia. It's written by Shelley Shaywitz and her son, the second edition. She is a psychologist who's been working in dyslexia for a long time. It's actually written for parents-ish. I don't know if it's accessible. I'm happy I'm a professional with some nugget knowledge in order to read the book, but it's a really good resource that's not a textbook, but almost like Ken Oppel and Julie Masterson's Beyond Baby Talk book, where it's kind of that accessible, not a textbook, but definitely some academic information in there. Overcoming Dyslexia is one that I have all of my students read. And then I use the multisensory teaching of basic language skills. I'll say that again, multisensory teaching of basic language skills. And
I'm on Amazon right now looking for this. So yes.
It is not written by SLPs, which I love, because again, you're getting some shared language. It is written by certified academic language therapists who have a lot of additional training and expertise with kids with dyslexia, but also have their PhD and EDD. So it's written by Dr. Carricker and Dr. Birch. And they have an activity book. Yes, that's it, with the beautiful sunflower. There's also an activity book. And so for SLPs who, just what is my knowledge base? How different are these terms for structured literacy versus what I've learned? I just think it's a great, even the activity book, the answers are in it for the type A SLPs who want the answer but would not want to, maybe not want to take the test without the answer, so you can check your work. I have my students.
That would never happen in our profession.
I'm right there though. I've got my answers and I'm talking with my students like, oh, let me check my work. So I always do the activities and then I check my work and then I talk about it with the students. I don't know. It's just one of those vulnerability things, right?
Yes.
You want to do your homework before you teach. It's such a great, I think, resource because it's so full of practical application, but also you'll see some of our terminology from our field, but also terms that are used more in the educational settings as well.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the books that I always use for my courses and would recommend.
Okay, wait, you were telling me before we started recording about a really cool one that you just co-authored.
Yes. So a lot of states now are having initiatives at the higher education for the state level, and Arkansas is one of them. So several years ago, general education K through 6 teachers have to take a praxis exam on literacy and some of the basic instructional practices aligned with literacy. And so at the time, I can't remember how. Oh, I do. I was on a search committee. I was asked to be on a search committee for a curriculum and instruction assistant professor position. And so on that committee, it was at the same time this legislation was coming down. And so they created a new course for gen ed teachers, for elementary education teachers getting certified in K through 6 on the foundations of language. And it was to meet the requirements for the praxis exam for the literacy examination that they needed in order to be a certified teacher. And so we published a book that I'm so proud of called Foundations of Language. And it's about what our field always taught that I think sometimes can be overlooked when you're thinking about elementary age, right? This book is, and the chapters I wrote, it would shock and surprise you, were speech and language development and phonological awareness and phonics associated with consonants. And so the book is just these foundations of language, and it really is meant to be there's certainly some core vocabulary, but it's meant to also be the first conversation that these students have. And my hope is that we end up having speech paths in there. We have to get there because of capacity and numbers. Right now, there's only faculty that can cover the elementary education pre-professionals. But one day, I'm pushing that we would have in that class speech path, gen ed teachers, sped teachers, learning about the foundations of language together. But it's meant to get them thinking about, reflecting on, how did you learn to read? What is your value at home? What was the value put on reading? How is language that you learned influencing how you learn to read and what you currently read? And so just thinking about your own language, your own literacy experience, and then here's how we're going to get to explicit, systematic instruction using language, using speech sound development, and how we're going to tie that to alphabetic knowledge and how vocabulary is also really important. So I'm really proud of it. It was very cool to work with this interdisciplinary group. We also had different professionals give a reflection so that there's all these shared perspectives. And so you have special education teachers, bilingual educators, teacher of the deaf, so that you're thinking beyond your own discipline. And I think, again, even if you can't be in the classroom, at least your textbook is not just this one, everyone from this field. And I used to be kind of guilty of that, where my textbooks were all written by speech language pathologists, the big people in our field.
Yes.
And so now I try to expand that capacity. And now the books I have, I used to let kids in my oral read, students, the very, very adult students that I teach, they were choose the memoir that they wanted to read for oral rehabilitation. And now I don't. I just pick it and I say, this is the one that we're going to read. That was written by a person of color with a very diverse background and experience. And so I think it's just sometimes having that exposure beyond our field can start that when you can't get the true interprofessional education with and from different disciplines. We have to get creative in, okay, I haven't hit where I want to be. Where can I take some baby steps?
Yes.
That class, hopefully next time I talk to you, that class will be interdisciplinary. The learners will be interdisciplinary, just as the authors were interdisciplinary when creating it.
Also, can you fathom being a student in that class and the person sitting next to you ends up becoming the first grade gen ed teacher that you're the school-based SLP for? Like, how freaking cool would that be? Because you'd have this unique, intimate, like we learn this together because that will happen, and you have stakeholder buy-in. That's the phrase I'm looking for. You have established stakeholder buy-in.
Yes.
Yes.
Who are the stakeholders? Yes. And that's really where I hope to have interprofessional education. That is the buy-in. And that's where before you become, I am the professional, right? Who are you? What's my identity? My identity is I am a team player.
Yes.
Who wants to communicate effectively. And here's my role and responsibility, but I know yours as well. And we have this shared value buying. That's where I think we need to start with professionals. And then we can get to the identity of, and I'm the SLP.
Mm-hmm.
But I did it backwards. I was like, I am the SLP. And then I had to go backwards and be like, oh, but here's all these other professionals too.
That's how speech and OT are about feeding. There's some that get like, dude, they get their panties in a twist on this thing. And I'm like, I don't know what they know, and they don't know what I know. But you know what? We have to not be silo clinicians. We have to work collaboratively for the greater good. So sorry, if anybody's ever seen Hot Fuzz from like back in the day, the greater good. But there's the truth of the matter. We're there for the child, so we have to put our egos aside so that we can learn together.
Yes. And so instead of just, this should be my whatever, learning like, here's what I know and here's what you know. And let's combine that for this awesome power instead of who's on first. I've just I shouldn't use sports acronyms anyway, because we
don't sport.
I don't compete. That's what I don't do. I like to collaborate, but all the competitive sports, I played field hockey because, again, I am, despite my accent, from the Northeast. And even playing field hockey, I was one of the fastest. And so I was fast and, my skills were okay. But my competitive edge, like I'm going to run you over because I will score the goal. I'm like, I don't know. It's kind of fun out here.
Fun fact, Goose Danger Dawson joined the cross-country team at school. My Goose is a little thick because we're in 6th grade. We are bringing up the rear to close out cross-country at every single beat. Bless his little heart. But you know what? He has dropped 30 seconds off, and he loves it. Yes. And he is such a little team player, and we stay and we cheer for everybody to finish because we're right about there, but he also doesn't like the intense competition, like the direct contact. But it was just kind of funny because I called Erin forward and I was like, how do you sport for cross country? Like, what do I cheer? Because I was a ballerina and not a graceful one. And she was like, just listen to what the other parents are saying, honey. And I was like, okay. So now we just cheer the school name and that's what we say. But like, I don't sport. I mean, I did get a manicure in school colors.
Acronyms. Yes.
Yes.
Because I really think, and I loved it as a teacher or as in the schools, I loved it as a teacher, but I love working with the teachers. And I love that connection. But I did feel this connect between, I have more expertise to provide and leverage. How do I do that in a way where it's not I am the expert? It's my expertise would facilitate better outcomes with the kids, but only if you, the teacher, share your expertise with me and the SPED teachers on this team too. And we're working with the counselor. It doesn't work as well when it's not that team effort and stakeholder buy-in. I love that.
Okay. So if somebody wants to take this class, like say they're like, this is what I'm seeing on my caseload. I'm really seeing that we need to do more. I need to grow my evidence-based practice for dyslexia. What is the advanced cert post
Yes.
Say the words again.
yes.
It's a
Postmaster certificate.
Okay.
So our certificate is 15 hours. It's all for school-based SLPs. And the 5 courses are, mine's first, it's literacy, then stuttering fluency, then feeding in the schools, right up your
Very
alley.
cool.
So yes, what is our role and responsibility with feeding in the schools, AAC, and behavior.
Awesome.
So all 5, just to complement, again, if you're new to the schools, if you've changed, or if you just want courses that are specifically designed for, I'm already an SLP in the schools, particularly if you need that professional development, so it counts for your continuing education. It's all through ASHA. But again, I think, I really think that if you're thinking about dyslexia, the books that I shared earlier are such great resources. I think about my meeting with a former student here, what's going on in the community. Reach out to your local university. What is going on there? So we do dyslexia simulations here. I'm so lucky we have such great experts here in our clinical faculty that I partner with, that come and teach in my class and provide, what they are doing in the clinical setting. We have a nonprofit dyslexia center here that's also providing some professional development. So I think there's lots of ways to get some additional training, whether it's taking a course, whether it's, ASHA has a lot of CEUs as well. They also have the IPE, IPP resources are awesome on ASHA. So they have some of these complex cases that are talking about what would each one of these professionals contribute in this case study. So I think, and those are CEU, I believe they're CEUs.
I think so. They have some that are not. They also have some that are just like real life interviews that are pretty cool. Yeah.
So I think there are ways. I think the first thing might be, if you're an SLP thinking, oh, I don't know. I don't know if I want to broaden what I do. I do language and there's other people. I think the first place to say, or the first step is, literacy is language, and I don't know how comfortable I feel about that. Just being that vulnerable. I had to be that vulnerable, and I had my PhD and I was the instructor and had to look at, I don't know if the book that I'm using is actually a really good book.
Yes.
That was really vulnerable.
Resources. Oh.
Yes, that was really vulnerable. And I looked at the really big names that had written that textbook and thought, can I even have this thought? And so I think
yes, you can.
Yes, just that wherever you are, being vulnerable in the more I know, the less I know, because I know there's more that I need to learn. And being vulnerable in what I learned 20 years ago is probably not so accurate today. And what I'm doing today won't be accurate compared to what I do 20 years from now. But just, again, continuing to expand that capacity for learning. And I just think that that thinking of literacy as language and just making sure that you have that solid foundation. Okay, now that I have that, where can I go for additional learning? And it might just be going to the professional development that only the teachers need to go to. And you just say, well, I'm the SLP. Can I go to? It might not. I wasn't required to when I was a speech path in the schools because we were itinerant. So we didn't have to do some certain things. It might just be that. And that when you show up, the teachers might, say, oh my gosh, here's this person who doesn't have to. I don't know. Again, school culture. One school is one culture, right? You've been in one school, so that might not be what your school setting is, but there's probably some opportunity to say, I could learn more. Where should I start? Yes. And then find that in.
Yes. And we're never too old to learn. I mean, if you're the smartest person in the room, get out and get a new room, because how are you going to grow? And I've said
I don't even know what that feels like. What's that? To be the smartest one in the room.
But I mean, honestly, may we never think that we are unteachable, right? Yeah, because hold tight if you think that's you, baby.
And the more I think we get we have to lean into what is our role and responsibility, scope of practice for SLP, and then interprofessionally, what do we contribute, and then what do others contribute? You can't learn every field. So you're never going to know it all if you're in that interprofessional realm.
Yes.
This has been so fun. I'm like,
this has been so good.
Coffee though.
I have an idea that we'll need to talk as a sidebar, but I will, so many ideas, but thank you so much for coming on. And I think we do need to do a part 2 on this one. So we will touch base on that as a second sidebar. But if folks are listening and they want to learn more from you, is it okay if you share your email address?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. What is your email address?
It is LM as in Mary, but it's really Marie because I was born in the 80s. Bowers, BOWERS at uark.edu. So lmbowers at uark.edu.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Everybody, if you're listening, be sure to check us out on First Bite Podcast on Instagram, as well as on the Land of the Faces, Facebook. And if you have a recommendation for a speaker that you'd like to see on, we love it. So just Instagram message Erin and I, and we will take a peek. Lisa, thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me. It was so fun. Until next time.
Till next time. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for joining us for today's course. To complete the course, you must log into your account and complete the quiz and the survey. If you have indicated that you are part of the ASHA registry and entered both your ASHA number and a complete mailing address in your account profile prior to course completion, we will submit earned CEUs to ASHA. Please allow 1 to 2 months from the completion date for your CEUs to reflect on your ASHA transcript. Please note that if this information is missing, we cannot submit to ASHA on your behalf. Thanks again for joining us. We hope to see you next time.
Feeding Matters guides system-wide changes by uniting caregivers, professionals, and community partners under the Pediatric Feeding Disorder Alliance. So what is this alliance? The Alliance is an open access collaborative community focused on achieving strategic goals within 3 focus areas: education, advocacy, and research. So who is the Alliance? It's you. The Alliance is open to any person passionate about improving care for children with a pediatric feeding disorder. To date, 187 professionals, caregivers, and partners have joined the Alliance. You can join today by visiting the Feeding Matters website at www.feedingmatters.org. Click on PFD Alliance tab and sign up today. Change is possible when we work together. That's a wrap, folks. Once again, thank you for listening to First Bite, fed, fun, and functional. I am your humble but yet sassy host, Michelle Dawson, the All Things Peds SLP. This podcast is part of a course offered for continuing education through speechtherapypd.com. Please check out the website if you'd like to learn more about CEU opportunities for this episode, as well as the ones that are archived. And as always, remember, feed your mind, feed your soul, be kind, and feed those babies.